The night the power went out in our subdivision was the same night I realized just how far people would go when desperation set in, and Sharon Whitmore proved to be the perfect example of that particular brand of hypocrisy. I had lived in the Meadowbrook Springs community in suburban Atlanta, Georgia for about 3 years when the HOA decided that generators were public enemy number one. It started with a small electrical fire at the Henderson place during a storm outage, something about improper ventilation and fuel storage. Nobody got hurt, but Sharon, our HOA president, seized the opportunity like a hawk spotting a field mouse. Within 2 weeks, she had pushed through an amendment to our community guidelines banning all portable generators from the premises, citing them as unacceptable fire hazards that endangered the entire neighborhood. My name is Marcus Matthews, and I work as a freelance software developer from home. Having reliable power is not just a convenience for me, it is literally how I make my living. When Sharon sent out that ridiculous notice via email and certified mail, I did what any reasonable person would do. I ignored it. Well, not entirely ignored it. I had done my research first. I pulled up our original HOA covenants, read through Georgia state law regarding HOA powers and limitations, and even consulted with a real estate attorney who owed me a favor. The conclusion was clear. The HOA could make recommendations all they wanted, but they could not actually enforce a ban on safety equipment that was legally permitted by county and state regulations. Generators, when properly used and stored, were completely legal. The HOA had overstepped their authority, as they love to do. I had installed a natural gas generator system about a year before the ban, professionally mounted and connected directly to my home's gas line by licensed contractors. This was not some janky portable unit sitting in my garage leaking fumes. This was a $20,000 Generac system that could power my entire house during outages, installed with all the proper permits from the county. It sat on a concrete pad behind my fence, properly ventilated, and met every safety code in the book. Sharon did not care about any of that. She cared about control. The first letter arrived 3 days after the ban went into effect. Standard HOA nonsense, threatening fines of $100 per day if I did not remove the generator within 14 days. I replied with a polite but firm letter explaining that their ban exceeded their legal authority and that my generator was permanently installed with county approval. I even attached copies of the permits and the relevant Georgia statutes. Sharon showed up at my door 2 days later. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA president. 50-something with that particular haircut that seemed to defy both gravity and good taste, wearing a pastel cardigan despite the 80-degree heat, and carrying a clipboard like it was Excalibur. Her expression suggested she had just discovered someone had parked half an inch over their property line. "Mr. Matthews, I am here about your flagrant violation of community standards," she announced before I could even say hello. I leaned against my doorframe. "You mean the generator that is fully legal and permitted? The HOA board has determined that generators pose an unacceptable risk," she said, consulting her clipboard as if reading from Holy Scripture. "All residents must comply with community guidelines. The HOA board does not have the authority to ban legally permitted safety equipment," I replied. "I already sent you the documentation." Her lips pursed so tight they almost disappeared. "Mr. Matthews, I do not think you understand how serious this is. We have the authority to maintain community standards and safety. If you do not remove that generator, we will be forced to escalate this matter." "Escalate away," I said. "I will see you in court if necessary. Have a good day, Sharon." I closed the door before she could respond. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a solid minute, probably trying to figure out if she could cite me for being rude. Eventually, she stalked back to her white Lexus SUV and drove off. The fines started accumulating after that. $100 per day, every single day. They sent letters, emails, and even posted notices on my front door. I documented everything and forwarded it all to my attorney. He assured me that we had a solid case and that the HOA was walking into a legal nightmare of their own making. Meanwhile, I went about my life. My generator sat quietly behind my fence, a silent guardian waiting for its moment. That moment came about 6 weeks after Sharon's visit. Hurricane Debbie had been tracking up the Atlantic coast, and while it was not supposed to hit Atlanta directly, the Weather Service warned about severe storms and possible power outages across the region. I made sure my generator was ready, tested the automatic transfer switch, and topped off my propane tank just in case. I also stocked up on groceries and made sure all my devices were charged. Sharon sent out an emergency HOA meeting notice the day before the storm hit. Mandatory attendance, she claimed, though she had no authority to make it mandatory. I skipped it. I had work to do and no interest in hearing Sharon drone on about gutter cleaning protocols during a weather emergency. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. It was not a hurricane by the time it reached us, but it was nasty. Wind howled through the trees, rain came down in sheets, and thunder shook the windows. I was in the middle of a video call with a client in California when the power flickered once, twice, and then died completely. 3 seconds later, my generator kicked in with a reassuring rumble. The lights came back on, my computer stayed running, and my client on the other end of the call did not even notice the interruption. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Thought I heard something." "Just my generator switching over," I said. "Storm knocked out the power. Man, that must be nice. I lost a whole day of work last year during our rolling blackouts." The call wrapped up 20 minutes later. I made dinner, settled in to watch some streaming television, and enjoyed the air conditioning while the storm raged outside. Through my windows, I could see the rest of the neighborhood sitting in complete darkness. No streetlights, no porch lights, nothing. It looked almost post-apocalyptic. I will admit there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that my banned, dangerous, unacceptable generator was the only thing keeping me comfortable while everyone else sat in the dark. Petty? Maybe, but after 6 weeks of threats and fines, I felt entitled to a little schadenfreude. The knock came at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone when I heard it, wondering who would be at my door during a storm in the middle of the night. I looked through the peephole and saw Sharon standing on my porch, drenched from the rain, her hair plastered to her head. I opened the door but left the screen door latched. Sharon, little late for an HOA inspection. She looked terrible. Her makeup had run, her clothes were soaked, and she was shivering despite the warm night. Behind her, I could see a couple of other people standing at the edge of my porch light's reach. "Marcus," she started, and the use of my first name immediately told me something was wrong. Sharon never used first names unless she wanted something. "I know we have had our differences, but I need to ask you for help."
Help with what?
"My mother is staying with me. She is 86 and on oxygen. The backup battery on her concentrator only lasts 4 hours. We have been without power for almost 3 hours now." I felt my smugness evaporate. "Have you called 911? They said all the ambulances are responding to emergencies. They cannot send someone just for power issues. They told us to go to the hospital, but the roads are flooded. We cannot get out of the neighborhood." I unlocked the screen door and stepped out onto the porch. The two people behind Sharon were her husband Greg, who always looked vaguely apologetic about his existence, and another woman I recognized as Linda Harris from the HOA board. "Why come to me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You are the only house with power," Sharon said quietly. "That generator we asked you to remove is the only one running in the entire subdivision, the generator you threatened to fine me $100 a day for having. Please," her voice cracked. "I know I was wrong, I know that now, but my mother could die." I stood there for a moment, letting the rain soak into my socks as I considered my options. I could turn her away. God knows she would have deserved it after everything she had put me through. But I am not that person, and more importantly, her mother did not deserve to suffer because Sharon was a tyrant. "Bring her over," I said. "I have a guest bedroom she can use." The relief on Sharon's face was almost painful to watch. Thank you so much, Greg. Go get the car as close as you can. I will grab some towels and help you move her." 20 minutes later, Sharon's mother was set up in my guest bedroom with her oxygen concentrator plugged into my generator-powered outlets. Her name was Dorothy, and despite the stress, she was remarkably cheerful about the whole situation. "This is quite an adventure," she said as I helped arrange her pillows. "Sharon told me about you and your infamous generator, did she now?" "Oh yes. She said you were being stubborn and difficult." Dorothy smiled. "Sounds to me like you were being smart." Sharon, standing in the doorway, looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole. "Mom, please." "Well, it is true, dear. You were rather militant about the whole thing." Dorothy patted my hand. "Thank you for helping an old woman, even though my daughter made your life miserable." "You are welcome, Dorothy. Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" "Tea would be lovely if it is not too much trouble." I left Sharon to sit with her mother and went to make tea. Greg and Linda were in my living room, looking uncomfortable and out of place. Greg kept glancing at the lights like he could not quite believe they were on. "So this is what having power looks like," Linda muttered. "Feels like a different world." I put the kettle on and leaned against my kitchen counter. "How bad is it out there?" "Pretty bad," Greg said. "The main trunk line is down. Power company is saying it could be 3 to 5 days before they get it repaired. Trees down everywhere, and half the crew is still dealing with the coast." "Anyone else in the neighborhood have medical issues?" Linda nodded. "The Johnsons have a young son with special needs. Their house is getting hot without AC, and he does not do well with temperature changes. Mrs. Peterson is diabetic and needs to keep her insulin cold. There are probably others." I thought about it for a moment. My generator had enough capacity to power my whole house with room to spare, but I could not exactly run extension cords to the entire neighborhood. Still, there had to be something I could do. "Okay, here is what we can do," I said. "People with medical needs can come here. I have got this room, the living room, and I can set up some air mattresses. For the insulin and medications, people can use my fridge. It is going to be crowded, but we will make it work. You would do that? Greg asked. Even after everything Sharon put you through? I am not going to let people suffer because your wife has control issues, I said. The kettle whistled, and I poured hot water over a tea bag. But we are going to have a conversation about those fines once this is over. The next few hours were chaotic. Word spread quickly through the dark neighborhood that my house had power and was open to anyone with medical needs. The Johnsons showed up with their son, a sweet kid named Tyler who was fascinated by my gaming setup. Mrs. Peterson came with her insulin and ended up making sandwiches for everyone because she could not sit still during a crisis. 2 other elderly residents arrived, one with a CPAP machine and another with medications that needed refrigeration. By 3 in the morning, my house looked like a refugee camp. People were sprawled across every available surface, charging phones, cooling off in the air conditioning, and generally trying to get through the night. I had gone through all my bread-making sandwiches and had started a pot of coffee that seemed to empty as fast as I could brew it. Sharon had been quiet since her mother had been settled. She helped where she could, organizing the chaos and keeping track of who needed what. It was strange seeing her in this light, actually being helpful instead of just bossing people around. Around 4 a.m., after most people had dozed off, I found her sitting on my back porch, staring at the generator that hummed steadily in the darkness. "Cannot sleep?" I asked, stepping outside with 2 cups of coffee. She accepted one with a quiet thank you. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you had not been here. If you had listened to me and removed this. Your mom would have been in real trouble. She could have died." Sharon's voice was barely a whisper, because I was too stubborn and controlling to admit I might be wrong. I sat down in the other chair. "Why did you push the ban so hard? It was not just about the Henderson fire, was it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "My father died in a house fire when I was 12. Electrical problem, they said. Something about bad wiring and a space heater. Ever since then, I have been terrified of anything that might cause a fire. When the Henderson place had that generator fire, all I could think about was my dad and how quickly everything went wrong. I am sorry about your father," I said. "But you know there is a difference between a dangerous situation and proper safety precautions, right?" "I do now," she wiped at her eyes. "I let my fear turn into control. I do that a lot, according to my therapist. Greg has been telling me for years that I take the HOA stuff too far, but I never listened. Sharon, I get wanting to keep people safe, but you cannot protect everyone from everything, and you definitely cannot ban things just because they scare you." "I know," she took a sip of coffee. "When this is over, I am going to call an emergency board meeting. We are rescinding the generator ban, and I am going to personally make sure all those fines against you are voided. I appreciate that. I am also going to resign as HOA president." I looked at her in surprise. "You do not have to do that." "Yes, I do. I have been doing this for 8 years, Marcus. 8 years of micromanaging everyone's mailbox colors and getting into fights about fence heights. I am exhausted. More than that, I am not good at it. A good leader would have seen the value in what you had instead of treating you like a criminal." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the generator hum and the distant sound of thunder as the storm moved off to the east. "For what it is worth," I said eventually, "you did a good job organizing everyone tonight. When the crisis was actually happening, you stepped up. That is different. That is helping people directly, not making up rules about what color they can paint their shutters." The sun came up a few hours later, revealing a neighborhood that looked like a war zone. Trees were down everywhere, branches littered the streets, and power lines sagged dangerously low. The rain had stopped, but everything was soaked and muddy. My house had become an unofficial emergency center. More people showed up as daylight came, looking for help charging phones, getting information, or just escaping the heat. Mrs. Peterson had somehow organized a breakfast operation using my kitchen, scrambling eggs and making toast for anyone who wanted it. The Johnsons took their son home to get some of his things but said they would be back because their house was like an oven. Linda Harris, who apparently had some emergency management training from her previous career, set up a check-in system to track who needed what. She made lists of medications, medical equipment, and dietary restrictions. Greg went door to door checking on people who had not come by, making sure nobody was in trouble. And Sharon, true to her word, had transformed. She was coordinating with the power company, calling local emergency services, and working with Linda to prioritize who needed help most urgently. She was still bossy, but now that energy was directed towards something useful instead of measuring someone's grass height. By mid-morning, a county emergency vehicle showed up. A tired-looking woman in a county emergency management uniform climbed out and made her way to my door. "I am looking for Marcus Matthews," she said. "That is me." She looked around at my powered house and all the people coming and going. "I am Jennifer Cross with County Emergency Management. We got reports that you have got a generator running and are helping neighbors with medical needs. That is right. Is that a problem? A problem? No, sir. We are trying to set up emergency cooling centers, but we are stretched thin with this storm. The fact that you have got things running here is a huge help. She pulled out a tablet. I need to log this location as an emergency resource center. We may direct other people your way if they need help. Is that okay? Sure, but I should tell you that this whole thing is kind of ironic. How so? I explained the HOA ban, the fines, and Sharon's midnight visit. Jennifer listened with an increasingly incredulous expression. Let me get this straight. Your HOA tried to ban the thing that is now keeping people alive. That about sums it up, Jesus. Well, for the record, Georgia law is pretty clear that HOAs cannot ban emergency equipment. You would have won that fight easily. She made some notes on her tablet. Okay, we are logging you as an emergency resource. If anyone gives you trouble, you call this number and reference this case file. County has your back. She left some supplies including bottled water, first aid kits, and information sheets about storm safety. She also left her direct number and told me to call if anyone needed immediate medical attention. The day settled into a strange routine. People came and went. Some stayed to help, others just charged their phones and left. A few brought food to contribute, which was good because my kitchen supplies were running dangerously low. The local news even showed up around noon, having heard about the house with power that had become an emergency shelter. The reporter, a young guy who looked fresh out of college, was very excited about the human interest angle. So you are keeping your neighbors safe despite the HOA trying to shut you down? He asked, camera rolling. I am just trying to help people, I said, uncomfortable with the attention. But your HOA president tried to fine you for having the generator that is now saving lives. She was concerned about safety. She made a mistake. She is also here right now, helping coordinate everything. He looked disappointed that I was not going to trash Sharon on camera. He tried a few more angles, but I kept the answers neutral. After he left, Sharon came up to me. You did not have to do that, she said. You could have made me look terrible. What would be the point? You are already dealing with the consequences. No need to pile on. She nodded slowly. I have been thinking about what I said earlier about resigning. I am going to do it at the next board meeting. But I also want to make things right with you first. All those fines, maybe $6,000 total, I am going to use my personal funds to pay them. Sharon, no. Just void them. I cannot just void them. The board voted on them. It will take time to reverse that officially. But I can pay them myself to clear your account, and then I will fight to get my money back from the HOA funds. Consider it my apology for being an absolute nightmare. That is a lot of money. It is worth it to fix my mistake. The power stayed out for 4 days total. My house remained an emergency hub the entire time. We had people sleeping in shifts, phones charging in every outlet, and my refrigerator became community property. The generator ran continuously without a single problem, proving every one of Sharon's fears wrong. Dorothy, Sharon's mother, held court in the guest bedroom like a benevolent queen. People would come sit with her, charging their phones and listening to her stories. She told tales about growing up in rural Georgia during the 50s, about civil rights marches she had witnessed, about the time she met Jimmy Carter at a peanut festival. Tyler, the Johnson kid, spent hours in there with her, showing her his drawings and listening to her read stories from books I had not touched in years. Mrs. Peterson's sandwich operation evolved into a full community kitchen. People brought whatever food they had that was going to spoil without power, and she turned it into meals for everyone. Greg turned out to be pretty handy and helped several neighbors jury-rig ways to keep their own houses livable until power returned. Linda created an entire database of neighborhood needs and resources that she said the HOA should have had all along. And I kept my generator running, my house cool, and helped where I could. When the power finally came back on Friday afternoon, there was an actual cheer that went up through the neighborhood. I watched from my porch as lights flickered on house by house down the street. People emerged from their homes looking exhausted but relieved. My house cleared out pretty quickly after that. People were eager to get back to their own space, their own beds, their own routines. Dorothy was one of the last to leave, insisting on making me a thank you casserole before she went. You are a good man, Marcus Matthews, she said, patting my cheek like I was 12. Do not let my daughter or anyone else tell you otherwise. Thanks, Dorothy. Take care of yourself. Sharon lingered after her mother and Greg had left. We stood in my living room, which looked like a disaster area with air mattresses deflated and cups and plates scattered around. I will help you clean up, she offered. Not necessary. You have got your own house to deal with. Marcus, I need to say something. She took a deep breath. These last 4 days, seeing how you helped everyone without hesitation, how you kept this community going when everything fell apart, it made me realize how wrong I was. Not just about the generator, but about everything. About leadership, about community, about what actually matters. People make mistakes, Sharon. You owned up to it. That counts for something. I want to do more than own up to it. I want to make real changes. She pulled out a folded paper from her pocket. I have already drafted my resignation letter. The board meets Tuesday night. I am going to read this, officially rescind your fines, and propose new guidelines that actually make sense, including explicit protection for emergency equipment like generators. That is a good start. I also want to propose something else. I want the board to officially thank you and compensate you for the electricity costs of running your generator for 4 days straight. It is the least we can do. You do not have to do that. Yes, we do. You spent your own money powering half the neighborhood. That is not cheap, especially running a whole house generator for that long. She was right about that. I had not calculated the costs yet, but between the natural gas usage and the wear on the equipment, it was probably going to be a solid chunk of money. Okay, I said. I will accept reasonable compensation for documented costs. Thank you. She headed for the door, then turned back. And Marcus, I am sorry. Truly, deeply sorry for everything. After she left, I spent the weekend cleaning up and getting back to normal. My house smelled like too many people had been living in it, which they had. But every time I felt annoyed about the mess or the chaos, I thought about Dorothy on her oxygen, Tyler finally relaxing in the air conditioning, Mrs. Peterson keeping everyone fed. It had been worth it. The following Tuesday, I attended my first HOA board meeting in over 2 years. The community center was packed, which was unusual. Apparently, word had gotten around about what was going to happen. Sharon called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. Before we get to normal business, I need to address several matters related to the recent storm and power outage. She looked around the room, making eye contact with various board members. As many of you know, our community recently experienced an extended power outage. During that time, one of our residents, Marcus Matthews, provided critical assistance to neighbors with medical needs by running his home generator and opening his house as an emergency shelter. There were nods and murmurs of agreement from the audience. What many of you may not know is that prior to this emergency, I led an effort to ban all generators from our community. I imposed significant fines on Marcus for refusing to remove his generator, which I claimed was a fire hazard and violation of community standards. The murmurs got louder. Some people were clearly hearing this for the first time. I was wrong. Sharon's voice was steady but emotional. I let my personal fears override common sense and legal boundaries. I punished a resident for having safety equipment that ultimately saved lives. Marcus's generator, the one I tried to force him to remove, kept medical equipment running for elderly residents, provided cooling for a special needs child, preserved critical medications, and served as an emergency hub for our entire neighborhood. She pulled out a document. Therefore, effective immediately, I am proposing the following motions. First, that all fines imposed on Marcus Matthews regarding his generator be officially voided and refunded if already paid. Second, that the generator ban be rescinded entirely. Third, that our community guidelines be amended to explicitly protect residents' rights to maintain emergency preparedness equipment, including generators, provided they meet county and state safety regulations. Fourth, that the HOA compensate Marcus Matthews for reasonable documented costs associated with powering neighborhood emergency operations during the recent outage. Linda Harris, sitting on the board, spoke up. I second all 4 motions. Another board member, a man named Tom who I had seen around but never really talked to, raised his hand. I third them. What Sharon did was out of line and Marcus deserves better. The votes were unanimous. Every single board member voted to approve all 4 motions. Then Sharon stood again. I have one more announcement. Effective tonight, I am resigning as HOA president and from my board position entirely. I have served this community for 8 years and I thought I was doing the right thing. But the recent events have made it clear that my approach has been controlling, fear-based, and often legally questionable. This community deserves leadership that empowers residents rather than micromanaging them. She handed a letter to Linda. Linda Harris has agreed to serve as interim president until the next election. I trust you will find her much more reasonable than I have been. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Some people wanted Sharon to stay and make changes rather than resign. Others agreed it was time for new leadership. A few people stood up to share their own stories of conflicts with Sharon over the years. It went on for over an hour before Linda finally called for order and moved on to other business. I slipped out before the meeting ended, not interested in the drama. I had said my piece by showing up and accepting the apology. The rest was for them to figure out. A week later, I received a check from the HOA for $873, covering my documented electricity and fuel costs from the emergency. A handwritten note from Linda was attached, thanking me again and promising that things would be different going forward. Sharon kept her word about the personal payment too. A check for $6,000 arrived with a note that simply said, "Paid in full." Thank you for being a better person than I deserved. Life went back to normal after that, or as normal as it gets in an HOA community. The new board, led by Linda, was remarkably reasonable. They focused on actual maintenance issues rather than petty aesthetic complaints. The neighborhood settled into a calmer rhythm without Sharon's constant enforcement actions. I saw Sharon around occasionally. She started attending a local community garden project and seemed much happier working with dirt than with clipboards and violation notices. We would wave to each other, sometimes chat briefly, but mostly just coexisted peacefully. Dorothy became a regular visitor. She would come by every couple of weeks bringing baked goods and wanting to hear about my work. She said I reminded her of her late husband, which I took as a compliment even though I was not entirely sure how. The Johnsons invited me to Tyler's birthday party, which was sweet if completely overwhelming. Apparently, Tyler had told everyone at school about the man with the magic generator who saved them from the hothouse. I became a minor celebrity among a group of 8-year-olds, which was both flattering and exhausting. Mrs. Peterson tried to set me up with her granddaughter, who was absolutely lovely but also lived in Seattle and had zero interest in moving to Georgia. We had a nice video call where we both politely agreed that Mrs. Peterson was adorable but perhaps not the best matchmaker. The following summer, hurricane season rolled around again. This time, when the weather service started tracking a major storm heading toward the southeast, something different happened. Instead of panic or confusion, my neighbors started preparing. 3 other families had installed their own generators over the winter. Linda had organized an emergency preparedness committee that maintained lists of residents with medical needs and coordinates response plans. They even created a phone tree system to check on everyone during emergencies. When the storm hit and the power went out, my house still became an unofficial gathering point, but it was organized this time. We had a schedule for who needed what and when. People brought supplies to contribute. Greg set up a whole monitoring system to track which areas had the worst damage. And Sharon, now a regular member of the Emergency Preparedness Committee, worked alongside everyone else without trying to control everything. She still had opinions, plenty of them, but she had learned to offer suggestions rather than demands. We got through that storm and several others over the next couple of years. Each time the neighborhood response got smoother and more coordinated. The generator that Sharon once tried to ban became the symbol of what good preparation and community cooperation could accomplish. 3 years after that first storm, I was in my driveway doing some maintenance on my generator when a car pulled up. A couple got out, looking around the neighborhood with the unmistakable expression of potential homebuyers. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "Do you live here?" "I do. Can I help you with something?" "We are looking at the house down the street, the one with the blue shutters. Our realtor told us something about this neighborhood having really good emergency preparedness." "She said something about a storm in generators?" I smiled. "Yeah, we have got a good system. Several houses have backup generators. The HOA maintains emergency supply caches, and we have got organized response teams if something goes wrong." "That is amazing. Our current neighborhood does not have anything like that." The man looked at my generator setup with interest. "Is that allowed here?" "We have been in places where HOAs banned all kinds of practical stuff completely allowed. Actually, it is encouraged now. The HOA learned the hard way that emergency preparedness is more important than aesthetic rules." They thanked me and headed back to their car, looking much more interested in the neighborhood than when they had arrived. I finished my maintenance work, testing the automatic transfer switch, and making sure everything was ready for whatever might come next. That night, I got a text from Sharon. It was a photo of her and Dorothy in the community garden, both covered in dirt and grinning. The caption read, "Mom says to remind you that you are still invited to Sunday dinner this week. She is making that pot roast you like." I replied that I would be there, sitting on my back porch that evening, listening to the quiet hum of my neighborhood going about its business. I thought about how much had changed from that midnight knock on my door. Sharon had learned that control was not the same as leadership. The neighborhood had learned that preparation and community mattered more than perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. And I had learned that sometimes standing your ground on principle leads to outcomes you never expected. My generator sat silently on its concrete pad, not needed tonight, but ready, always ready, just like the neighborhood had learned to be. The story could have been about revenge or vindication. Lord knows I would have been justified in slamming the door in Sharon's face that night, in making her suffer consequences for her actions. But that would have hurt Dorothy and Tyler and Mrs. Peterson and all the other people who had nothing to do with the HOA's overreach. Instead, it became a story about second chances and communities figuring out what actually matters. Sharon got to learn and grow without being destroyed. The neighborhood got better leadership and real safety improvements. And I got to keep my generator, make some actual friends, and enjoy Dorothy's Sunday pot roast on a regular basis. Not a bad outcome for refusing to back down when I knew I was right. The next HOA newsletter, now produced by Linda with input from an actual committee rather than Sharon's solo dictatorship, featured an article about emergency preparedness. It included a photo of my generator setup and quotes from the County Emergency Management Office about best practices. They even created a community fund to help families with medical needs install their own generators if cost was a barrier. The article ended with a quote they attributed to me, though I did not remember saying it exactly that way. Being prepared is not about being paranoid. It is about being responsible to yourself and your neighbors. Good enough. I had been through worse misquotes. Months turned into years, and the generator incident became neighborhood lore. New residents heard the story and usually found it hard to believe that an HOA would ban emergency equipment. Those of us who had been there would assure them it was absolutely true and point them to the news archives if they wanted proof. The local news station actually did a follow-up piece 2 years later, part of a series on community resilience. They interviewed several of us, including Sharon, who spoke candidly about her mistakes and the changes she had made in her life since resigning. I was so focused on controlling things that I lost sight of actually helping people, she told the camera. Marcus could have let my mother suffer to teach me a lesson, but he did not. That grace, that compassion, that is what real community leadership looks like. I am still learning from his example. It was generous and probably would have made me uncomfortable if I had watched it live, but I was on a work trip to Austin when it aired. By the time I got home, several neighbors had texted me links to the video with various comments ranging from "You are famous" to "Sharon really did change" to "This is wild." The thing is, none of what happened was particularly heroic on my part. I had bought a generator because I needed reliable power for work. I had refused to remove it because the HOA lacked the legal authority to make me, and because I knew I was right. And I had helped people during the storm because turning away sick and elderly people in a crisis would have made me a monster. These were just basic human responses to the situations in front of me. The fact that they seemed remarkable said more about how messed up HOA culture had become than anything special about my actions. But I understood why the story resonated. People were tired of petty authority, tired of rules for the sake of rules, tired of being told they could not have practical safety equipment because it might look unsightly. My accidental stand against all that became symbolic of something larger. The Meadowbrook Springs HOA was different now. Not perfect. There were still disputes about parking and the occasional complaint about someone's lawn, but different. The focus had shifted from enforcement to facilitation. Instead of telling residents what they could not do, the new board looked for ways to help them do what they needed. They created a community tool library where people could borrow equipment rather than everyone buying their own. They organized skill-sharing workshops where residents taught each other everything from basic home repair to cooking to technology literacy. They built a little free library at the neighborhood entrance and started a community garden that Sharon helped manage. These were the kinds of things that actually built community, rather than the aggressive enforcement that had characterized Sharon's tenure. I had coffee with Linda one morning about 4 years after the whole generator incident. We were sitting at a local cafe, and she was telling me about the HOA board's latest projects. "We are looking at installing community solar panels," she said, "not to replace individual power, but to run the streetlights and maybe power some community spaces. If we get another major outage, having those resources available could help a lot of people." That is a great idea. Very different from the old days. God, yes. Can you imagine Sharon's reaction to something like that? She would have formed 3 committees to study the aesthetic impact and probably banned the whole thing because solar panels did not match the neighborhood color scheme. To be fair, she has changed a lot. She has, and I give her credit for that. It takes guts to admit you were wrong and actually change your behavior. Linda stirred her coffee. But I will tell you, those first few months after she resigned were such a relief. The board meetings went from 3-hour battles to 45-minute collaborative sessions. We actually accomplished things instead of arguing about mailbox heights. How many fines have you issued since taking over? In 4 years? Maybe a dozen. And those were all for serious violations like someone building a structure without permits or letting their property become genuinely hazardous. We do not do the petty stuff anymore. Life is too short to argue about whether someone's flower pot is HOA approved. We talked for a while longer about neighborhood business, but my mind wandered back to that storm night, to Sharon standing on my porch soaked and desperate, to the choice I had made to help despite having every reason not to. That single decision had rippled outward in ways I never anticipated, changing not just Sharon but the entire culture of our community. It made me think about all the small choices we make. the moments where we can choose grace or grudges, compassion or revenge. I had been lucky, in a way. The right choice had been relatively obvious, and it had worked out well, but I knew that was not always the case. Sometimes doing the right thing cost you more than you wanted to pay. Sometimes people did not change or learn. Sometimes grace was wasted on people who took advantage of it. But I was glad I had made the choice I did. Not just for Sharon or Dorothy or the neighborhood, but for myself. I got to be the person I wanted to be in that moment, and that was worth more than any vindication or revenge could have provided. My phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. Sunday dinner, 6 p.m., no excuses. Sharon is making her grandmother's biscuits. I smiled and texted back a confirmation. 4 years, and I was still getting commanded to attend Sunday dinners by an 80-something woman who had adopted me as a surrogate grandson. There were worse problems to have. The generator hummed softly in my backyard as I drove home from the coffee shop. It was running its weekly maintenance cycle, automatically testing itself to make sure everything worked properly. A small green light on the control panel indicated all systems were normal and ready. Always ready for the next emergency, the next storm, the next crisis. Just like our neighborhood had learned to be. And that, more than anything else, was what the whole experience had taught me. Preparation was not about fear. Rules were not about control. Community was not about conformity. It was all about people taking care of each other when things went wrong. About having the resources and relationships to weather whatever storms came your way. My band generator, the one that had caused so much conflict and drama, had become the catalyst for all of that understanding. It sat on its concrete pad, properly ventilated and permitted, a silent guardian that had proven its worth and changed a community in the process. Sharon had been right about one thing: generators were powerful, just not in the way she had feared.